Hi everyone, welcome to Crown Pointers, and today we are doing a follow-up video because we had talked about introversion and all of the extroverts said, well, what about us? And we do want to make sure that we get to the extroverts too.
Yep.
And I'm talking to Patrick Kerwin, who's an expert in the Myers-Briggs type indicator, and we'll get a little bit of a recap of what that is. But we want to talk about how to optimize life for and as an extrovert. So whether we're extroverts ourselves or we're working with extroverts, how to get the best out of the extrovert type.
Yep.
Just for people who didn't see the previous video, and if you haven't seen it, please go back and check it out because this is great content that you gave us. What is the Myers-Briggs?
So the Myers-Briggs personality assessment, type indicator personality assessment, is an assessment that's designed to assess people's natural personality style. So it looks at 4 different dimensions of personality, 4 different aspects. And the first one is what energizes you, and that's the one that we're going to talk about today. That's the extroversion, introversion. And the second one looks at the kind of information that you like and trust. And then there's one that looks at your decision-making style, and then one that looks at how you approach your life. And for each of those 4 aspects, there are 2 opposite preferences, and it combines your preference on each one and forms a personality description. And there are 16 different personality descriptions that come out of the Myers-Briggs. So people use it to understand themselves, to understand others, and then figure out how to navigate conversations, relationships at work and at home and really in life.
Well, in the past video, we talked about introversion, especially because in the culture we're living, it's a very extroverted culture.
Yes.
And so we were focusing on, well, how do I's navigate through that, and how can we make sure we get the best out of introverts in a kind of extroverted culture?
Yep.
And some of the feedback I got was, well, why do we have to make special accommodations?
Exactly.
And why are we giving them special treatment? And what about the extroverts?
Yeah.
So that's one of the reasons we want to talk about that today.
Yeah.
And what's your feedback?
You have to really recognize that the world is extroverted, like you said. And so a lot of messages that people receive their whole lives, well, you were fast, you put it right out there, you said what was on your mind. All those are very extroverted messages that actually endorse extroversion. And then when you think about people going to work, work is, for many people, work is very extroverted. You know, we've got half an hour, put it out there, you got to say it, we got to move fast. All those things are kind of extroverted kind of messages. And so introverts have been swimming upstream against that for a long time. So that's why we spend so much time on focusing, and I spend so much time focusing on what extroverts can do for I's. But it is a two-way street, no doubt. And there are things that people with a preference for I can do to really improve their interactions and relationships with extroverts, and to actually honor extroversion with the people that they work with. Yeah.
What are some of those things that introverts can do for extroverts, and how do we get the best out of extroverts?
Yeah. Well, so I was thinking about it as soon as we started talking and you were introducing, and I was like nodding my head and going, yes. And that's something that extroverts do, right? When we talk to each other, you give a lot of cues of like, I'm in the conversation with you, like you're nodding your head, things like that. So one of the easiest, it's like the easiest thing that introverts can do is just give a cue of this engagement, which is like that, a head nod. A head nod goes a long way. And extroverts, a head nod doesn't mean you totally agree with what I'm saying or we're on the same page. It just means we're having a conversation, like you're in. Another really easy thing to do is, as an introvert, is just to kind of, if you don't have something to say or add on to, because sometimes an introvert thinks, well, the reason I'm not saying anything back to you is I don't really have anything to say. So if you don't have anything to say, if you just let them know, like, oh, that's, you know, I don't really have a thought on that. Or if you actually feed back to an extrovert what they just said. And it's not just parroting, you know, things like that, but it's, if an extrovert says, wow, I just had a really horrible, work was hard today on this project, I just couldn't, you know, get my hands, I couldn't get anywhere with it. It was just a really long day at work. For an introvert, you might just be like, okay, yeah, sounds like it. In your mind, you might be thinking, wow, it sounds like a hard day. If you just say as an introvert to the E, if you say, it sounds like you had it was a tough day for you today. The introvert's like, it was, right? Yeah. And so that just lets the extrovert know that you are engaged, and it also forms a connection that extroverts really are looking for in others.
How else can extroverts flourish? What are some situations they can put themselves in? How do we enable them to be their best selves given their preference for extroversion?
Last week in a workshop, there was somebody with a preference for E who said, like, when she's trying to put together a presentation or, some kind of presentation, it's more productive for her to go sit in a Starbucks where there's a lot of activity and people. She doesn't have to be interacting with them or talking to them, but just having that energy around. She said just helped her get into her kind of groove. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Are there other things that in the work environment introverts can do to help extroverts extrovert?
Wow, they don't usually need a lot of help is the thing. I think, though, the same kind of principles apply that we talked about earlier at work is, I think it's also recognizing that for extroverts, that talking things out is not just like a self-indulgence, because I think sometimes it looks that way. People think, oh, they just don't know how to stop. It's not, for some people that might be true, but for a lot of E's, they say actually it's that talking things out is not just they like it, but it's that word productive, like it's really productive for them. And so for an I to be able to serve as that sounding board and maybe, and like we said, kind of doing a little back and forth with an extrovert, even if it's just mirroring back what they just said, will really help an extrovert get their best work out and their best ideas out.
Is there anything else that you think we should know about extroverts in order to equip them to be their best fullest selves or ourselves if we are extroverts?
Yeah. Well, there's something I think is good for probably introverts to know about extroverts.
Okay.
And that is that everybody has their share of misconceptions and people misreading them. And with extroverts, there are misconceptions that come up all the time with E's. And a lot of times, and you touched on some of them earlier when you said that sometimes people think, an extrovert couldn't be shy. There actually are shy extroverts, and shyness is a social discomfort for whatever reason. And so you can get extroverts who say, no, I'm energized by the outer world, but I'm actually a shy person. So that's one thing. Sometimes people think that extroverts never want downtime and never need downtime. That comes up in workshops all the time when people say, oh, you're an E, you can just go all the time. And that's actually, as an extrovert, that's not true. And extroverts will say that they actually need downtime and they actually enjoy their downtime and having that quiet time for reflection. And the theory that this instrument is based on says that if you're an extrovert, that's critical, that you take introverted time because otherwise you don't get information from your inner world. And just like introverts need to extrovert so that they interact with their outer world. But that's one big misconception. And the other, I think, one that people often misread is that they think people that with a preference for E are like uber confident, right? Like, oh, you must be so confident. And E's all the time are like, no, so not confident. But I think it's because of that, they talk things out. So it seems like they're confident because more words are coming out, but actually it can be almost the exact opposite.
Why is it that extroverts talk so much?
Yeah.
Or at least get the rap of talking quite a bit?
Yeah. E's will say it's not that they like to talk. It's that kind of like talking about, being sort of that self-indulgent kind of thing. But it's extroverts actually say that so for example, let's say that you're working on something as an extrovert and you're doing it on your own. And so, you're thinking about it, which you can do, and you can toss around an idea or you can plan the steps that you're going to take or what your goals are. But then you have a conversation with someone, and extroverts will say they can have a conversation with someone and in 5 minutes they'll be like, oh, you know what? I figured it out. This was great. This was really helpful. Absolutely. And so, right? It's not just about like loving to talk just for talking's sake, although it can seem that way. But what it is actually that's how things kind of crystallize for an extrovert. And the things that you've been pondering or planning actually become very clear when you start talking about them. Or sometimes a conversation, you thought you were clear in your mind and you articulate it, and the conversation actually makes you realize you should go in a different way. And why you couldn't figure that out on your own, I've asked myself that many times, like, why did it take, this 5-minute conversation? Right. But it's because of that energy and that productivity that comes from a back and forth. And it's not just talking to a person, but it's having that back and forth. Yeah, that's a really big one. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us. And
my pleasure.
If people want to learn more, what would you say is the best next step?
So there are a couple things. If they actually want to do the actual Myers-Briggs, there's only one place they can actually do it online. It's not free, but it's through a website called MBTIonline.com. And that's the only official version of the Myers-Briggs, the validated, reliable version.
And then tell us a little bit about the true type tales.
All right. So, after I have a lot of stories when I do workshops, and people said, you should write a book. So I started keeping track of all these, I'd be in a workshop and I'd be like, oh, that's a great example of extroversion or introversion. So I ended up writing this book that's a series of stories about each of the 4 aspects of the Myers-Briggs. And so, for example, how extroversion, introversion shows up in different interactions that people have. So it's a really, sort of easy, hands-on way to understand personality type and kind of everyday interactions.
Fascinating.
Yeah. And that is available on Amazon, yes.
Perfect.
Yeah.
And we're going to have the link right below the video.
Okay.
And then I wanted to kind of break down the workshops. Now, I guess there's trainers, so you could train to become a trainer who goes into an organization and actually does this really gratifying work with teaching them to work better as a team. And then what are some of the steps, I guess, if somebody could have someone come to their organization but not get certified themselves?
Yep.
Okay, so is that the 2 kind of options?
Yeah, pretty much so. It's like what you went through, which is the MBTI Certification Program, and that's a 4-day program for people that want to actually purchase and administer the Myers-Briggs, because the purchase is restricted to people that are MBTI certified. And so you go through that process, and then you can do the MBTI work on your own. And then the other is to work with an external person who comes in. And so that's probably the biggest part of my work, is going in with working with teams and leaders and coming in and doing MBTI workshops that way. And then there are a variety of topics. There's things like an introduction to the Myers-Briggs and getting people oriented, kind of talking about some of the things we're talking about with E and I, but looking at all 4 aspects. But then you can do other applications, things like I do tons of type and stress. That's one of my biggest workshop requests. That's a pretty complex topic. And so I do lots of workshops on that. There's type and conflict, type and change. There's all sorts of different areas that you can apply the Myers-Briggs to.
Wonderful. Yeah. Well, like I said, the links to all of those resources are going to be in the description box right below this video, so please be sure to check it out. And then while you're there, you can hit subscribe and the bell to be notified when we upload a new video to Crown Pointers each week. And the point of Crown Pointers is to bring you tips, tricks, and pointers for the adventure of everyday life. And thank you so much, Patrick, for providing us with this great pointer today.
My pleasure.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.